In this video, I'm sharing a UX chat I had with a good friend and a UX design director, Mike Wong. Mike is focused on ensuring the creative components of a company vision is consistent across branding, marketing, design, and user experience. He strategizes design and help integrating user-centered innovation to build a sustainable businesses. Mike is based in the Bay Area and currently a senior director of user experience design at Amobee. Well, thank you for doing this first.
Sure, absolutely, man. This is fun. Like, it's nice seeing an actual other human face other than my team.
I know.
The people I work with and my family.
So yeah, if you want to just maybe say a little bit about your experience in design or experience design, how did you start in it? How did you get into experience design?
Sure. Should I give a little bit of my background?
Sure. Go for it.
All right. So I started design. Well, technically speaking, my undergraduate background was in visual design. From there, my first job actually was a visual designer. And I was kind of lucky to land in a position where I was doing specifically visual design for user interfaces. And this is back before like iPhones, right? So this was like 2006, 2007. I was able
before the iPhone.
Yeah, iPhone was what, 2007, right? So it was like right before iPhones came out. So people were still not used to having like, a computer in their pockets, right? So our product was this kind of touch screen kiosk where like if they're in the brick and mortar shopping experience, like how do we assist that? Right now, obviously people just, pull up their phones and check stuff up on their phones. But before they didn't have that anyways. So that was my first job. And then from there, I realized that, it's not just about making, pictures pretty, right? It's about making, helping users get to a goal, try to reach their goals as soon as possible, while also providing them with the relevant information they need to make kind of decisions and so forth, right? And that's what kind of perked my interest in user experience design. Back then, there wasn't such a thing called user experience design. It was just considered like human factors or industrial design or, whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
What transitioned me over fully to user experience design was when I was going through my master's program in human factors and ergonomics. And that started because I was looking for jobs, and that was back in the last recession, like 12 years ago, right? So 2008, got laid off, looking for jobs. And then I applied to this one place. I actually applied to 23andMe. And then they had a UX designer position at 23andMe. And then obviously I got rejected from that place, but it was interesting. I was like, oh, what's UX design, right? And I looked into her background and I found the master's program that she went to, which was the San Jose State, master's program that I eventually graduated from.
Yeah.
Anyways, went through that program. During that program, got an internship at Panasonic doing healthcare, kind of like healthcare devices, enterprise-y type of UI, UX stuff. Really liked it. Got a job at SAP afterwards, and kind of for the custom development division. And that's when it really kind of exploded. So I spent a lot of time at SAP learning about user experience, specifically learning more about like soft skill side of things. So dealing with customers, understanding their needs, working with them. It was a lot of travel. Left there to go to Cisco for their enterprise networking. And then after a little while there, came here to where I currently am at Amobee. It's technically in the ad tech industry, leading a team to kind of unify their products and to provide kind of what they call a converged experience.
Awesome, man. I'll ask you a little bit about like your first job and how you got into UX. So what did you also need to get your first job? Like, I know you mentioned like you get your master's degrees, and that will get you into UX.
Oh yeah.
For someone who is starting his career, like what you think they will need to get their first job?
So for me, it all kind of compounds together, right? So when I was an undergrad, I was a horrible student. Like I didn't do anything. I was like really bad, got really bad grades, barely graduated, but like, I talked to a lot of teachers and I was really good friends with them. I even babysat for one of my teachers. Anyway, so like the whole point is like I wasn't a bad
type of primary. I'm just kidding.
I wasn't like a bad person, but I wasn't really too heavy into school, right? So what I decided to do in my master's program, I was like, okay, crap. to get into most master's programs, you need a good GPA. You need like, not GMAT, but like, what is it? The one thing, the GRE, right? So I was lucky. This program didn't require GRE at the time. Now I think they do. And I was like, crap, I'm really worried I won't get into this program, So I was like, you know what? When I get into this program, I'm going to step it up. I'm going to do everything that I should have done in my undergrad, talk to people, network, be good, get good grades, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I kind of did. And in that mentality, right, the effects of that was that, like, I got to know my professors really well. I got to know my classmates very well. I was very proactive, very into like the clubs and like just kind of just meeting people in general, and getting my first gig. What it really was the summer before I started the program. I was constantly in contact with the director of my master's program, and I got really lucky. I got super lucky, right? So I was telling him, hey, look, I didn't have the same background as most of these other HFE students, right? A lot of them, majority of them, like 80 to 90% of them had like psychology backgrounds, And I was like really worried that I would be like the dumb one that was like, oh, I'm creative, I just have visuals, like, like, so I was like, hey, is there anything that I can do before the start of the semester that can help me out with like the understanding, so I'm not like super far behind? And I, was having back and forth emails with him, and he was a super nice guy. He was like, you know what? I have this opportunity where I'm doing consulting work. Do you want to join me on my team? I was like, heck yeah, right? And that customer or that client that he was working with was Panasonic. So, I got some firsthand, exposure to, usability research, all the things that I would eventually learn in the program regarding like human factors, right? And all the usability stuff. And then after I guess the project was over, Panasonic came back to him and said, hey, look, the students that you had were really cool. Like, we're looking for 2 kind of interns to work with us during that time for our next upcoming projects. Like, would they be interested? And he was like, oh yeah. And, they're jobless right now. so there were 3 of us. They took 2 of us, me being one of them. And then that's how I started, my first gig with Panasonic.
Did you have a portfolio at the time before you get the job, or how did you handle this?
I did have a portfolio. I believe I did. It was probably like 3-4 versions ago though. But like every single time, that's the one thing I made sure I always had updated as much as possible was every major job I had, I did an update for my portfolio. I don't know if I still have it around. I probably have remnants of it somewhere, like file wise, but I did have a portfolio.
I'm asking too because it's like an issue like probably all of us face in the beginning, like when you don't have work to show, like what would you do? I remember at the time, like I kind of redesigned a few like random, it was like at the time I think it was Twitter or Facebook, and kind of redesigned it myself and added to the portfolio because I didn't have much to show like for the very first job.
Yeah.
Anything that you did that will be kind of cool tip?
Yeah, like, I mean, I think that's the biggest issue that most new designers have, right? Which is they're worried, like, oh, I don't have anything to show, right? But it's not about like actual products. I mean, if, for example, coming from school, you have school projects, right? And coming from other work areas. So I had this problem when I was transitioning from SAP to Cisco, which was like all my work was pretty much confidential, right? So we signed like confidentiality agreements, so I would not be able to show the work. And the other problem is like the work that I was doing was mostly enterprise. So enterprise work is, you can't just go to the Google Play Store or like iTunes and just download it and see what it is, right? It's like usually enterprise products are just used within the company itself. It's not, widespread. So no one knows about it. So I faced a conundrum there. But so the 2 things is if people are starting off, I would say the most important thing is to show off process, right? It's like, even if you come up with a project on your own and just it's fictitious, right? Like what you just did, right? Which is just find a project that you would find interesting, something you're passionate about, right? Redesign it or point out do some heuristic evaluation, right? Whatever you need to do. And then it's mostly about understanding how this person would go about it. Like most of the times right now, because of all the boot camp stuff, it's a very cookie cutter type of process that people are more generally aware of now, right? So oftentimes when I'm doing like design reviews or when I'm looking for new candidates where I'm looking at their resume, it's almost like I'm seeing the same stuff over and over again, which is perfectly fine, right? But that's like almost like the minimum now, which is you have to be able to show process. Like usually for portfolios that I see that don't have any process and just show a whole bunch of nice screens, it's immediately like I don't even need to look at you.
The dribbling of the UX design, the dribble
yeah.
effect.
And then for in my case, like because I was stuck between like, okay, I can't really show anything. Yeah, again, like what I decided to go towards was just kind of showcasing methodologies. And on my website, like currently, it's I haven't changed it since I transitioned from Cisco to SAP, but it's mostly just about like information that I know and trying to showcase that information because I was not able to show kind of any of the work really. So I have little bits and snippets on there, but it's mostly like it's almost like a blog format, which I just like plaster all the information that I previously learned from my job or from academics and stuff.
Cool. It's probably a stupid question, but would you hire someone with no portfolio in your team?
No, I absolutely would not. There's no way you're getting on any. Well, I can't really say never, but like. Yeah. I mean, typically, if you have a portfolio, that's your first step in. From a review process, usually it's your resume is kind of like the first impression, right? Like, does this person have the basics? I'm not interested, and no one really should be interested in having a resume that's completely filled out. It's more about like what you want me to know about you up front, right? I think that's the most important thing about a resume.
Yeah.
And then from your resume, I should be like, okay, this person's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Perked my interest. So therefore I'll go and look at your portfolio.
Like or from your experience, like how to stay motivated in design, how to keep going as you grow in your career as well and move on to look more senior jobs, like how to keep yourself up to date and motivated on design.
Yeah. So staying up to date, I don't think is as hard because well, it depends on your lifestyle, really. So, like for me, I'm on the computer all day long. So, if there's any like major updates to like design conforms, right? Like things that people just conform to, if Google makes any updates on stuff, or if Apple makes any updates, like it's pretty apparent if you're just online all day long, right? You just look at the computer, you're like, oh, hey, look, they added this little thing here, and then. If they added something, I'm assuming like if the bigger companies add something that I'm assuming that they've done their research, and even if they did not do their research and they add something or like a new like some new thing for people to conform to, like there's going to be millions of people that see it that they're going to probably conform to, right? Anyways, so staying up to date, other than just like the readings and maybe some books and just being online all day long and just interacting with new types of interfaces and components and seeing how people's mental models shift, like that's the thing that we need to keep updated on. I feel, right? Is like how what people's perceptions on modern interfaces, given the context that you're in, and that's very important. Is to understand the given context, right? So in an enterprise environment, it's usually borrowing mental models from what they see on the consumer level. On the consumer level, it's mostly like you can be a little bit more avant-garde when it comes to consumer level, right? Because it's like whatever consumers are used to, then it trickles down to everything else.
Yeah.
As far as staying motivated, so here's for me, it's like if you are, what motivates me at least, and for my job and before and now is the challenges. Is hey, look, are the projects challenging enough? For me to kind of really, is it really like challenging where it's like I have to use my brain? Like I spent so much damn money investing in master's degrees for my brain. I would like to leverage that, right? I would like to see some ROI on my brain, right? So if it's challenging, if it requires me to do some in-depth thought, it's not just about the visual side, because our industry is very kind of multifaceted, right? Because not only do we have to be concerned about the business side, the visual side, the psychological side, but also just like everything, right? Technical, how does it technically fit in, timelines, scopes, all that stuff. And it applies to a lot of industries as well, right? But but oftentimes people forget that those facets also apply to UX. The big challenge with UX, I feel, for most folks is trying to get people to understand that UX is not just about visual design. Especially from my background, I come from like mostly enterprise, right? It's not just about visual design; it's about scope. I mean, not scope, scale. It's about making sure things, you know, work in a design system kind of manner, right? So anyways, so the challenge is really what keeps me going, right? I'll tell you what kills my motivation. What kills my motivation is when you know you need to be able to do something and you're not given the resources or the time or the tools needed to accomplish those kind of things, right? So for example, if we're just putting together a design system and it's going to span across 5 different products, right? And you give me one designer to do that, like me, maybe someone else, that's when it's really demotivating, because what that implies to me is that, okay, first of all, you don't understand, or you're not taking what I'm saying seriously, right? Because I'm going to tell you this is not going to happen with one designer. And then if you tell me, hey, look, make it work. All right, this is going to take like 5 years.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. I mean, it's not in the questions, but I think it will be really good if you maybe talk a little bit about like how, if you're in this situation, how to get like as you move on to be like a design lead, like part of your job pretty much is getting the buy-in from like the executive, for example, like money that you need for the project, all the thing. So how would you think, or how would you go at it to get what you need to get your job done? Something like a design system. How would you feel that?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the company, right? It's not as like I said, it's not as procedural. Those kind of things are not as procedural. It's more organic, right? And it really depends on kind of the company culture. So I can say right now, at least the company culture at my company is that they respect UX. They understand it's necessary. They understand that it helps provide a competitive edge to customers, for customers against other competitors. So they understand the importance of it, and they were simply seeking someone to kind of help push that edge along, right? Sometimes you'll run into companies where that company culture is instilled, like, yes, UX is important. They might not understand why it's important, but they at least understand that it's important. You might get certain companies like Apple, which they know user experience is important and they know why, right? It's like, we cannot have achieved what we have today if we did not have a good user experience or whatever, right? I mean, regardless of what it is now, at the very basics, it's like in the beginning, was their kind of edge, right? And that's how the iPhone was kind of successful.
As long that they don't think of it as just to make the product sexy or pop, that's a good step. That's a good
exactly. Direction. So there's a spectrum. There's companies that understand it's not just about making things sexy and good looking. It's a value add to our product and product lines, right? So that's like somewhere along the lines of, I would say, like an Apple company. Yeah. You have some companies like mine, which is like, we know it's important. We don't know why it's important. We need someone to help us out to show us, right? And you have other companies on the other spectrum, which is like, yeah, we just need, we don't really need UX designers. The engineers could probably put some interfaces together for us. Usually those companies fail. Yeah. Unless you're talking about strictly a back-end service, right? Which then you don't need a UI for it. But anything that will require UI, like any kind of type of software design that needs a UI, like usually what I see is something not that extreme, but more like, okay, we need a designer because we need a product to look cool. That is like the worst possible scenario to work in, right? Because then they don't understand what it takes to go and make a product successful from an experience standpoint, right? They don't think about it from a customer-centric point of view. They think about it more like, we're providing them with what we have. They should be happy with what we got, right? Yeah. We have, I often see this in enterprise environments too, which is like, oh my gosh, like, I bet you the customers can't wait to buy this product because we just gave them 20 different functions, right? Yeah, they didn't previously had. They are gonna be fighting to give us their money, and then usually afterwards, when they put it out to the market, it's usually crickets. Yeah, right? Because then it's like, yeah, you provided 20 different functions, but I only know how to use one of them. So your actual value add is that one feature that I probably don't really even need,
or it doesn't work well together, like in a good ecosystem, like each one of them are separate. Yeah.
That people usually constantly think of like, oh, how many features can I add? How much features but they don't think about the value add, right? And that's the most important thing. It's like, you can have 20 different features, and if they work well together, great. If they are just as efficient to go through one feature as to 20, great. Oftentimes that's not the case, right? Like, if I have to spend 5 hours a day learning how to use your software, and then once I learn it, then I it takes me like 2 hours to just do one thing. That's not value add on my side, right? Then I might as well just go take an Excel sheet and paper and pencil and do that manually myself, because it's probably going to take the same amount of time, you know? So people often forget that part from a company standpoint. So that's why, like, you know, it's important for us as user experience designers to kind of be able to showcase the value there, right? So going to your second point is, how do we showcase value? So for me, this is something that they really don't teach you in school. And this is something that I try to emphasize a lot on my teams, which is the soft skill side of things, right? Which is like, look, we are constantly, like, the way I see it is we're constantly in an uphill battle, right? Of trying to like validate our positions and try to, you know, show the company that we have some value other than making things pretty. Now, some companies you have to do more of that than others, but there's always some degree of that you have to do, right? The way I see every single conversation when it comes to product reviews or demonstrating, workflows or any of those kind of things, right? Is when you have to put on your kind of like salesman hat, right? Is you have to not only sell the design, but you also have to sell the idea, and you also have to sell yourself, right? Meaning that, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. Trust in me. Because everything before it gets into the hands of a UX designer, everything before that is all concepts, right? It's all just words or requirements in a requirements document or things along those lines. You know, we actually make it happen, you know? So for example, if on a requirements document, they say, I need a button, and, you know, the PM or whoever is managing that project might be thinking, oh, I know what that button should be, but it might not be a button. It might be, I don't know, a radio button, or it might be a toggle that would actually fit the scenario better, right? So as the designer, I would say, oh, no, that's not a button, right? It still meets the requirements of the function that you're trying to do, but I would not use a button, I would use a toggle. Okay, let's say that's the scenario. It's up to me to convince the PM that the toggle is the better choice versus the button, right? And I have to go through and tell them like why, right? It just can't be like, oh, well, you know, like the button doesn't look cool, and I just feel like the button's better. You know, I feel like the button's better. Like anytime you put in like I feel, like you pretty much lose the argument against like any kind of stuff. I feel, at least. Yeah. I feel so. But I'm talking more subjective, right? So when you're talking in a work environment type of manner, where like a lot of the components and a lot of the workflows and a lot of the logic that we input to a project does come from some kind of like source of truth, right? Some kind of sciencey type of stuff. So for example, if I were to argue a case for a toggle, like a toggle in my mind would be a user needs a component to quickly switch between two states of a particular object, right? That's when I would use a toggle. It should not be something that is used for something that might have some dire consequences. Like, you know, if I'm turning on and off an entire account, I probably don't want to use a toggle for that, right? Because that can essentially just like eliminate someone from a whole entire system. If it's something that I could do before I actually implement it, meaning that if I'm using in a form field where I could toggle things, great, because at the end of the form, I still have to decide whether I want to save this or not. It's not going to have any major impacts, right? So anyway, so those kind of things, right? And now oftentimes in my team also, it's like when we do reviews, those are kind of questions I always ask my team as well. It's just like, did you guys use the right components, right? And if you guys did use the right components, how would you argue for that case? You know, because when we do reviews from our design team, I always try to be the first gatekeeper. Like I always try to be that asshole that like asks all the dumb questions to make sure that when the PMs get to it or when the engineers get to it, like they have a solid response for everything that.
You always need one of those.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You always need some asshole to just be like, why'd you put this there? What is this? What is the point of this? You know?
Yeah.
So,
because you will get the questions from the PM, also the engineers, because they also like working on the product, and there's a lot of like emotional attachment to the product as well.
Because sometimes people are very passionate about what they do, and it's understandable, and that's a good thing, right? And they don't want to see any kind of changes made. Mm-hmm. Other times, people already have an idea of what the product should be or what they're working on should be, and if it deviates from that, then they're going to have issues. And other times, some people are just trying to be snark assholes, right? Trying to be smart asses and be like, oh, why'd you put that there? You know, it's like, Well, we have a response for those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And anytime we don't have a response for why we put certain things there, or why we use certain components, or why the workflow flows the way it does, that's where we fail.
Yeah.
You know, and those are the kind of things that, hey, you can learn from some of it in school, but on top of being able to logically kind of explain yourself for why you did what you did, there's a lot of things that people don't understand that makes a huge impact, right? So when you're presenting, your soft skills, your tone, your presence, right? Like your ability to convince people. Like what I tell people on my team is like, go check out some like really awesome TED Talks or whatever, right? Any kind of presentation where you have just been captured and you have just been mesmerized by the speaker.
Yeah.
Try to learn a little bit about what parts of their speech, what parts of their demeanor, their whole entire presence was the part that captivated you, or parts that captivated you, right? And try to mimic those.
Yeah.
Because that's what helps sell your product as well. Because if you can instill confidence in your participants or in your viewers that you know what you're talking about, then they'll less likely question you on every little bit, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So anyways, those are kind of things that I try to tell my team to work on. And as far as like being able to sell your ideas, like those are kind of things that it's not going to happen overnight, right? And these kind of things take time. Not everybody is a, presenter, right? Like everybody, presents and is extroverted in different levels too, right? So not everybody can do that, but it takes practice.
It is a really good point, and I just want to add to that as well, is learning the language that of the audience that you're speaking to. That's also a lot of important things and a lot of like design presentation. I always tell my team as well, like sometimes you have to not to change your words, but change how you present it from an audience perspective. If you're presented to designers, they will get and understand all the terms about UX without explaining anything. But if you're presenting to PMs, engineers, you still need to tweak some of your words to get them to kind of understand what you're trying to convey.
I would have a strong, I have a strong second that. I would add a strong second that to it, because I feel like that's really important, is know your audience.
Yeah. So what advices would you give for someone who is one-shop designer in a small company who need to implement a UX design process, but alone in a small company or a new team? So what advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, that was me for a while when I was like, so just to give you some further background about when I was at SAP, it was, we had like 5 designers total, all across North America. So I was in charge of all the West Coast projects. So given that I was in charge of all the West Coast projects, like I said, we had to go out and meet customers. I was the only designer. It was usually like me as a designer, a solution architect, which would deal more with like the technical design. And then we have like maybe a lead engineer that comes with us, right? Now, as the sole UX designer, it was up to me to kind of, from a project standpoint, to kind of gather the requirements, ask all the questions that are needed to make my job successful from the customer, do the prototyping, do the iterative work. It was mostly, you have to be very proactive, right? I guess is the advice I have to give, is you have to be very proactive. You have to know who to reach out to. You have to know when to reach out to them, right? And you have to know, like, you really have to get into the minds of your stakeholders, whether it be customers or internal stakeholders or PMs or, engineers, whatever. You have to understand what they need. And then you need to be able to bridge all that stuff together into your own kind of vision of what the product is. Right, so that's your wireframes, your high-fis, your interactions, and so forth.
Yeah.
If you are working in just like an organizational sense, so there's 2 ways. Like there's a single designer in a project, and there's a single designer in an organization. Right, so that one I just described is how I would advise people to work through in a project manner. Like you're the only designer in a project, right? Then everything when it comes to this project, figuring out what kind of level of design is needed, what kind of context, what everything, like that's all you, right? You have to be able to do that. And the hardest part with that is being able to manage your time properly, right? For me, at least, it was tough, but then again, I wasn't, I was a single non-dad at that point. So it was easy for me to just work nights and weekends. So it wasn't too bad. But it is a very time intensive. Okay. The other part is, if you're a single designer in an organization, right? Meaning that you report to, I don't know, C-level, or you are, just one designer in a whole entire organization, then not only are you responsible for all these projects, which by the way, should never happen, right? If you're the only designer in an organization that is very UI focused or software focused, there's an issue there, unless you're a startup, right? Yeah. Now, even for startups, I would say try to get some help ASAP, at least some junior level person, or at least an intern to help you do most of the, the lower level designs.
Yeah.
But if you were the only designer, then that means you would have to do everything from the components to the workflows to the wireframes, the prototypes, everything. And on top of that, you have to help provide strategic directions for your organization, be able to identify the tactics for that. So you need to be more on the businessy side. Just because if there's no one else in the organization that is a designer, or does any kind of UX design or things like that, you don't want engineering or product to kind of really dictate your timelines and your kind of approach, right? Because they're not going to be fully aware. One thing I often tell the people on my team is that, hey, look, if you're going to be doing something, make sure your vision is not being steered or dictated by product or engineering, because they have their own kind of vision on how they would want to do things, right? Yeah. I mean, obviously, if things they say make sense, kind of take that into consideration. But they're not thinking UX typically. They're not thinking if I want to add this button, what kind of impact would it make on the user experience? That's our job, I
actually always say that when in my first jobs, when I face these issues, and I always say you hired me to give you the UX design perspective. You didn't
tell me what to do at that point.
But at the same time, I would say there's still kind of you need that balance of you need to gain their trust as well, and be inclusive in your process, so not to come off. But I totally agree with what you're saying as well.
It goes back to all the things that we're talking about, right? It's not procedural, it's more organic. It depends on the company, it depends on the people that are in the company, it depends on how you are able to sell yourself as a designer, how much confidence you instill in the organization as a whole, right? And you might have more or less kind of leeway from there,
Now, thank you so much for being part of this, and it's been really awesome catching up with you. So thank you so much, and come back anytime.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, let's chat more often. Whenever you have some time, we just chat, maybe have a virtual beer with each other and just kind of talk about stuff.